the Luminous Possibilities podcast. We offer a diversity of perspectives from many fields of medicine, esoteric and ancient wisdom, and subtle energy, arts, and sciences. Find deeply fulfilling pathways for co-creating with yourself, life, and human communities around you. Find inspiring attunements to your own optimal living roadmap, true authentic self, and the most radiant frequency for living life to the fullest. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Luminous Possibilities podcast. I'm your co-host, Kinan White, and I'm here with Kevin Wong with Habitual Roots. And Kevin is a dear friend of mine, brother. We met earlier this year, maybe about a year ago, and it's just been awesome meeting, hanging, connecting, and sharing all kinds of mind-body practices with each other. And yeah, just cross-pollinating. So, hey, Kevin, how's it going?
Good. Wow, a year ago? It's kind of gone by pretty quick.
Yeah, no kidding.
What a year it's been. Thank you, Keenan, for having me on the show, and really honored and excited to see what we can uncover and connect on today.
Yeah, me too. Can't wait for you to share your wisdom and your heart. I know you're definitely one person that always brings me into a feeling space. And I really appreciate that. A lot of times, you know, we can connect in so many ways with people. And when I connect with you, it's very it's very easy and unspoken. And there's something that's really meaningful about that these days.
Mm. What's most meaningful about it?
I think for me personally, there's sometimes a sense of needing to fill in the gaps and, um, speak or talk about a lot of what's going on in the world. And it's not that I necessarily feel that way, but I think a lot of people do. And I certainly do once in a while. But it's nice to come into the space of a person that really, you have this sort of like abiding nature into silence. And I just really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also agree. It wasn't always that way for me, and I'm sure a lot of people's journeys, silence is looked upon kind of negatively at times, and recognizing what silence even is or the value behind it. It's such a beautiful art to it, and sometimes we don't even know what silence sounds like.
Totally. Yeah. And it's not always that silence is really quiet or a low volume. I mean, sometimes it's very loud and there's so much to say in that silent space. So thank you for bringing that element to connection in life. And I feel like it's important right now. Um, so today it sounds like we're going to jump into the topic you mentioned about the sustainable you. And I can't wait to hear more about what you mean by that. I've definitely witnessed a few of your lectures and some of the things you've presented to the public. So I have an idea, but maybe you can give us a brief sense of what that is, and then I'd like to hear a lot about what's your background, what are you up to now, and how did you get here?
Thank you for asking.
Yeah,
Yeah, the sustainable you is a really fun topic that I am passionate to share because, again, I like to say that the most authentic version of you is the sustainable you. And any other version will never take you to where you really fully want to go because that isn't the most authentic you, right? And so rediscovering that for myself was a beautiful journey. And I find it to be a journey for everyone in this life is that we get conditioned very much so through our friends, our family, through life experiences and relationships, and to everything in between, even at work with our coworkers. And with that being said, we start to uncover, how we can adopt other people's habits or ways of being or personalities. And these traits start to evolve our character, that we show up as. And of course, we're never the same person that we were, a couple of years ago to even yesterday. But as we notice how we continue to get molded by life itself, it's continuing to fractal us further and further away from what the highest truth of who we are, right? And so the sustainable you is an opportunity for us to reflect and take this moment of stillness and silence and reconnect back to what is the truest version of us.
Yeah, beautiful. And how important is it when we could find ourselves in life, adopting personas that really aren't even ours and wondering what is missing.
Mm. Well, with that being said, what do you think has been missing from people's journeys?
Well, I think pretty much like you just said, like a little bit more time and space spent within that field of connecting to yourself.
Mm. Yeah, and they like to fill the space, right? And
Hmm.
what's been interesting is I've had this theory, and I'd love to hear your thoughts too. But as you can imagine, our brains are very powerful, almost like computers, right?
Hmm.
Processing a lot of information. But what's interesting is the brain isn't really built to store information. It's built to process and be creative and solve problems, essentially. But as we can imagine, earlier stages of our brain development, we were told to store a lot of information, like our friend's address, the directions, and then our friends' contacts, our family's contacts, and all these things that our phone now kind of does, right? We've kind of alleviated that part of that brain holding on to all this information into a device, let alone all the information that schooling and work and everything else had us to hold on to. And so then if we imagine like the brain almost working out at this gym, holding up all our friends' contacts, and then all of a sudden we have MapQuest now, and we're printing out our directions, and then now we have Google Maps and everything else between, alleviating that. Then our brain has now built this muscle, in that area, and then now it's kind of free will to
Hmm.
receive whatever else it wants to hold on to. So I find that it was almost like a blank canvas that pivoted right around per se the 2000s when we started releasing this new form of technology that was alleviating that part of our brain that is now receptive to holding on to filling that space. But what's been interesting is what have we been filling that space with, and
Mm.
that's when all other things kind of start taking off with social media and other propaganda and in society and stuff. So I find it really interesting that it has um, evolved in that form where we've been kind of um, creating new ways to show up that may have been taking us closer or even potentially even further away. Because I can find that the platforms that we have now can definitely reveal the most sustainable or most authentic version of you, but also is causing certain other individuals that may be experiencing the latter.
Yeah, totally. It's kind of a funny catch 22 because on one side you're saying, we have less need to store the information in our actual brain. The device has it. It's got us covered. But then, the influx and the inflow of content from a device like a phone or a computer in the immense amount of information possible that's flowing through our minds is actually greater. And so kind of makes me wonder like what is actually being stored. If you scroll through social media, you're scrolling through a news article and you're reading all this, it's flowing through, but then what's held? There is an imprint. There's that like yogic term samskara. It's a little bit different, but it's more or less an impression of your experience. And so there is an impression of the experience you're having that's creating some conditions in the body, some programming, some wiring that's influencing who we are, how we're behaving, how we see things, what we're even believing. So yeah, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I really enjoy that you bring up the fact that information continues to flow, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there's multiple dimensions and layers to what we're about to uncover here because I find that the information we may receive through the news or social media or any kind of context, even a book, right, is information that moves through us. But like you said, what gets held, what gets stuck into that memory or database, right? And it's kind of like emotions, right? We allow emotions to move through us all the time, but sometimes thoughts, memories, and these past or future experiences cause us to hold on to something, right? We
Mm-hmm.
read this book and we're like, oh my gosh, I remember that from my own personal experience. And then you hold on to that part of the book or that part of the reading. Or then you see on social media and you
Mm-hmm.
remember this friend, and you're like, oh my gosh, I remember that time we went out and we had this great time in the park. And you experience that level of um, almost those multi-dimensional ways that we can take our present out of the present, even though we are in the present, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, it definitely does. Back in college, I studied, I took this class called Native Americans and Cinema, and I was studying cinema and communication and all that and avant-garde, and it was really interesting. Probably one of the most fascinating classes. But in that one, I do remember, I remember this moment of how the Native Americans believed at one point that a photograph of a person captured their soul. And at first, I was like, "That's all right." I mean, it feels like there's a level of superstition there that's possible. But if you really think about what a photograph does, it captures your attention into a time of the past, out of the present. And a lot of the main themes we explored were, how to actually live more in the present and appreciate now. And there's certain ways that, cinema, movies, photographs, all these things can actually support us being more present. Maybe there's a resolution in the way we understand the past, or maybe understanding our history gives us a better way of knowing how to act in the future. And I think those are all important pieces, but I do feel like in some ways there is a huge, like capture. There's like almost like this. I'm looking for another word, but it's like we're captured into photographs that take us away from the kind of the brilliant moment where all possibilities exist, and we can really do or think or feel anything. In a way, we're such powerful creators, yet this simple moment might pull our attention in and capture us in a way that it feels maybe minimal, but it's actually pretty big. And I liked one astrologer that's been in my field. He mentioned how the war we're in right now is actually a war of attention, and I thought that was pretty interesting. Like if there's any conflict that sort of supersedes a lot of you know the layers of what's going on in the world, if you really think about it, we we create from a place of focusing our attention on something, and then directing our energy towards it. And if our attention is captured by you know certain channels or certain content, whatever it is, then where's that leading us?
Mm,
And I guess that's the main question I think about is, you know, simply put, where's your attention leading you?
mm. I like that you say that too, because your attention is almost everything. Your presence is where
Mm-hmm.
your attention is going. Your presence doesn't have to be in the present, but it's you're connected towards attention of where you're currently at, right? So where your attention is taking into the direction of not only yourself, but maybe other people. And
Mm-hmm.
that raises a lot of questions, because if we know that there's an infinite amount of possibilities, right? Those unknown possibilities in, per se, the quantum space, then we can start to understand that the attention that we have placed on the past, the present, and the future is influencing all of it at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it raises a lot of question as to even the education system that has evolved, my journey, and I'm sure yours as well, and many other people, the way that they view the past and the history and the way this country was built and other countries have been built. And then that means that our attention has been placed there, right? And those images and those contexts have then encapsulated the soul and the essence of those beings that were experiencing that, per se, time, right?
Yeah.
And so then our attention, now knowing of that, is also influencing theirs,
Mm-hmm.
same as their attention and their awareness and their
Mm-hmm.
presence quantumly, technically, are influencing ours and everything in ahead.
Yeah, we're that connected. And I feel like one of the things that you previously mentioned in your last comment was about, I mean, you're sort of saying the same thing, but what it made me think of was like this importance of silence being this intermediary space, or almost like intentional and like energetic container in which non-attachment can be practiced. Because if there's so many engagements, or there's so much attention placed on, the past or the future or whatever it is, and we're not living in the present, and we're not really connected to who we are now, which is a whole nother thing, because the person that we are each day and each moment is really changing. It's not really like a static thing. I mean, I think there are constants to our personality, and there's constants to kind of our behavior, and our habits are driving that largely. But I think, part of a part of connecting to yourself is actually asking the question, like, who am I today at this moment? Because who I was, I could just keep focusing on that past self, or that past version, based on the events that took place and what actions I took. It's the same thing with history. We can look at humanity and see, like, well, that's who we are, but humanity's changing in each moment too.
Mhm.
And I feel like that I don't know, you were kind of in between the lines, like highlighting this piece of like attachment. Like, we could attach to a definition of who we are, whether it's personal or in a collective sense. And I think that could be pretty misleading. So I think I just see the real, I'm seeing and feeling and seeing this emphasis on how important silence is in sustaining, like, that connection to our authentic self, because it does require time and space.
Mhm. Yeah, and I want to also preface that, you know, it is a practice, recognizing what even a container is, you know, creating that safe space for individuals and even yourself to experience non-attachment, right? Because the container itself is like, truly that space that you can define in stillness and in silence. But sometimes we don't recognize the importance of why to even do that or how to even do that, especially the way we're conditioned with, again, social media, society, and the pressures of, the role that we've built for ourselves, right? I am this parent, or I am this coworker, or I am this friend, and we start to evolve and again create these responsibilities or these things that we have to uphold, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what creates even more fascination is then if you show up to that friend or that family member or that coworker, you almost start to respond the same way, right? And then they respond the same way because you respond the same way. And then that's not a safe container, because then you're attached to a previous version of them as much as they are attached to a previous version of you. And so then what happens is then it's this domino effect of living in this continuous cycle and not evolving and not changing. And then having those past notions of, oh my gosh, they're always that way. They're always going to say this. They're always going to do this because I do this. Right. And then what happens is we get stuck in that. But like you said, is how do we find that space of silence and really create that container for people to experience that non-attachment? And the non-attachment is, of course, the biggest practice, because then how do we truly experience the present, right? And then that uncovers, well, the sustainable you in the present is truly non-attached. But that in itself is a whole practice in itself too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I love what you're saying here, and it's, yeah, like the non-attachment. Yeah, it's not so easy at first, like, because there's a level, like, sometimes I remember meeting up with you, and there's a couple times where I was like, all right, like, this is kind of uncomfortable. But then what I was realizing was, like, the uncomfortable part was like how much you were holding this pure, like, kind of presence with me, and that's just who you are generally. Like, I see you as that, like, holding that energy. And I was like, whoa, okay, like, I'm actually uncomfortable about me feeling like I need to present a certain persona because I'm used to doing that with people. And it was like, whoa, like, I don't have to do that now. Because I feel like I often offer that as well with people, but it can be uncomfortable. And I know that I make people uncomfortable sometimes with that too. But I guess I'm highlighting this piece because I feel like it's important to say that, in that process of working with non-attachment and living a more present life, and connecting to more of your authentic nature, sometimes it's uncomfortable beginning to take those steps, because that default behavior programming, like you said, the showing up in the same pattern with somebody, that kind of is easy. It can be very comfortable because it's familiar. And so to begin dropping and being like, wait a minute, like, what is my authentic nature? it sometimes feels a little bit like disrupting, because it is. It's actually disrupting all the conditioning that you've had.
Hmm. It's almost like that sense of survival, that sense of self wants to be comfortable, right? And that discomfort is it's notifying you as the witness that you're doing something out of the blue or out of the box, something that's not normal to you. And I thank you for bringing that up because, I take a lot of enjoyment in feeling uncomfortable, especially experiencing that with other people, because that's an opportunity for us to feel something that we may not always feel. And a lot of
Love that.
times, we take time to just be in comfort. We just want to be in comfort. But recognizing how can we place ourselves in situations or environments and not only make ourselves uncomfortable, but also if another person right beside you needs to feel uncomfortable, let them feel that way. It's not you that made them feel that way. They felt that way because they needed to.
Yeah, it comes back to some of that Toltec wisdom around not taking things personally and seeing that mirror, And it reminds me of David Data as well, where he wrote a book called The Way of the Superior Man. And one of the things he talked about with, being in a relationship with a woman, and just cultivating relationships in general, walking more of a path where you can feel a lot more of the strong points in your masculine. I mean, he's like, go out in nature, like have a hard time, like be uncomfortable. And it's just, I really love that wisdom, because it's true. Like there's a certain level of like being our animal side. We have a survival mechanism, and if we're around comfort all the time and we're just finding this complacency, we're almost gonna find like there's gonna be some discomfort that arises out of that eventually. And if we can be with it, I think we can be with a side of ourselves that wants to express too, because it's not just comfort here in life.
Mhm.
There's uncomfortable, there's sadness, there's all a whole range of feelings that go along with being here, being alive.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of it is, learning that living is the pure essence of the purpose. Us being is a direct connection and correlation to our purpose. The experience in itself is the gift. And so, can we start to remind ourselves to not even be attached to that sense of self or sense of labeling, right? The
Mm.
sadness, the worry, the fears, and the happiness, the joys, the gratitudes. These are all labels, and we're still
Hmm.
attaching a value added to this or that.
Yeah.
I want to feel this and I don't want to feel that. But how do we see all of those pieces as a part of our human experience and our
Hmm.
purpose?
Yeah, I think it's interesting even think about like something like sadness, for example. We can tend to label that bad because we're in this culture that's like in the pursuit of happiness. And I always find that's a little misleading, because we actually have both. So if we're just on the pursuit of happiness, and we try to avoid sadness, what happens with sadness? We push it away, and if you feel it, maybe you need a pharmaceutical antidepressant to help you with that. And it just seems insane to think that that's actually what some people think. But I don't see that it's necessarily, their fault. It's in some ways like there is a culture driving it, and there is, companies, and there's profit machines that are driving that as well. Um, but yeah, it's a I guess it's there's a lot of layers to this topic, but I was feeling into the part of even something like an emotion like sadness. You don't even have to label it that. Like there could even, because I think, if you're sitting in silence and you're like, oh, okay, like there is some sadness. If you're not labeling it as good or bad, I think that's a step forward. And then I like how you're pointing to, like, even any label, like that's also misleading, because really it's just sensations, and like feeling those sensations is, it's not really good or bad. Sometimes it feels really, really nice
Mm.
to feel something that's labeled bad.
Yeah, I find it interesting that feeling is a constant also um, battle that we're experiencing, right? We're told not to feel,
Mm-hmm.
and we're told that we can't feel certain emotions. We can only feel these emotions. And there's a lot of, per se, what they call spiritual bypassing in this world right now, right? Where a lot of the practices are for you to stay happy, stay grateful, and almost neglect that fear and the sadness that does exist, not only in our own journeys, but then other people, right? And noticing that, oh, when you're feeling this way, no, I don't feel that way. It's okay. Remember that you're all grateful for all these other beautiful things, right?
Right.
And you're literally bypassing things that you may need to actually feel. Um, I think really for me, feeling was a huge awakening when, well, there's multiple for sure, but one that I remember it most through the system was when I had tore my ACL and meniscus, and I've healed it so far, and it's been doing very well now. But
Mm.
then, of course, my parents being, first time living in this country, me being the first generation, they kind of abided by what this Western culture had kind of given us or told them, right? Which I love them for, and I'm grateful for to have experienced it. But to know the depths of how the chemicals and this profit system has created a way for people to numb feelings, and I took the medication that I was given, of course, given by the doctors that they knew or believed to be best for what was, healing. But literally at that time, I was like, I don't know, 14 or so. And I was numb to the world for a couple months, healing my knee and my leg, and just noticing how people would come into my room and my space and, you know, give me that sense of love and healing, but I couldn't feel any of it. I was just
Mm.
numb to the world and just numb to my even
Mm.
sense of self. I was just witnessing life pass by at that time, looking back. But again, it was an opportunity for me to experience that yin and yang, right? Like that depth of non-feeling and feeling, right?
Yeah, it seems like you really had that experience in order to have that contrast, and I find that's a lot of the reasons why we have our experiences is to eventually learn the other side and have something driving us to the other side. But it's wild. I didn't necessarily think about like if someone is taking a drug, how anyone supporting them, there might be this sort of like, I don't know, shield or barrier put up because if they are numb, they're not going to necessarily receive the support around them. That's pretty wild.
Mm-hmm. And who
Yeah.
knows how that really works? Because, I mean, yes, we can chemically know what it's doing to the physical body, but energetically, what is it doing to our auric field, right? And are we even able to receive information from other things, or other people, just by receiving that chemical imbalance, or I guess rebalance, that they perceive, as healthy or needed?
Yeah. And energetically speaking is really emotionally speaking.
Mhm.
Yeah. Wild. Well, you've told me some pretty, interesting stories about like how you ended up, because I don't think you've necessarily always had these views and you've been on your own journey. And, I found it pretty interesting to hear about your story. I think you were working in corporate for a little while and you found yourself in Hawaii and you met somebody and I feel like if you're open to it, sharing that part of your journey, I feel like was is nice to hear for people because um, I imagine people listening and it's like how do you end up finding your way into a place where you really you feel authentically aligned to what you're doing and how you're being in the world. And it
Mm.
seems like you've pretty much landed in that position. Um, so yeah, any side of it you want to share, I'm open to hearing, and I'm sure people would love to hear.
Yeah, thank you for asking that, and
Mm.
happy to share it. I think it might be useful to kind of even go a little bit further back. Um, you know, Life in itself is a journey. So whatever people are experiencing, I honor it for sure, because I recognize that all the trials and errors that I had to go through has been the reason why every single monumental moment has led to the next, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
me being the oldest of two younger sisters, and as well as the first generation born from Vietnamese Chinese descent, it led me to somehow being born in North Carolina, the east coast of the United States. And from there, I lived definitely in the Bible Belt. So, I grew up in a very, very small town, pretty much one stoplight, three churches. That was a lot of the earlier experiences that I had. And so pretty much from what I can recall, I was going to a Christian academy, but my parents were per se Buddhists, and so they would share some Buddhist practices, and we would go to temples occasionally. But all my waking life while my parents were working at this restaurant was also at a Christian academy. So I'd be around all these people doing prayers, and also doing recitals, and even like being on the stage, and I was like a soldier for like one of these like plays with Jesus in it and stuff like that. So it was really interesting,
Yeah.
to experience that side of things and
Mm-hmm.
see the contrast, but also similarities.
Mm-hmm.
So that really opened up my understanding and questioning of what is faith, and what is this whole world built on religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so many out there. And
Mm-hmm.
so as I started to question it, kind of led me into all these other opportunities to understand more of this world. And that also almost isolated myself more. It made me kind of start to see and ask and wonder a little bit more than what I was really told. And so that kind of made me question and dive into, well, what is this life and what is this purpose at a young age? And, of course, I wanted to fit in at the same time, not being too different, but also different enough to know myself. But still, I didn't know myself, right? And so, of course, life progressed and schooling happened, and didn't always go to the best groups of friends, but also trusted that was what I needed. And I started doing I started smoking cannabis really young, and started experiencing other substances really young, and just be based on one, not only peer pressure because of those people that I wanted to be friends with, but also just now looking back, that was really what I needed. If I didn't do that, I probably wouldn't have had the level of connection to my emotions or feelings, or to this other side of awareness that I had, right? And
It's
but
amazing how cannabis provides that, actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was huge, and heart opening, definitely, and
Mm.
experiencing that at a young age, it led me not to abuse it later on in life, right? I had a greater respect for that plant and the medicine itself, going further into life itself. And so it was a really beautiful journey. And um, I guess it led me into trying to find what I really wanted to do, right? So then, hence, now from middle school, high school, into going into college, right? I, of course, experienced different things that continue to ask, well, what do I want to be? Who should I, become, and what should I provide to this world, right? And that's a great question that people want to answer, and sometimes may never answer, which is, what is my purpose? And then that's an interesting one, because we get stuck in saying that what I do and what I provide is my purpose. But like we alluded to earlier, right? The purpose of this life isn't what you're here to be or to do or provide, right? It's really you. You are the purpose. Like your
Mm-hmm.
experience is the purpose,
I love that.
yeah. And I mean, it's kind of simple, but a practice. And so it led me to really discovering, okay, well, should I follow this path, what my family did, becoming engineers, becoming this like trade, and like doing these things. And I've went down that path, for a little bit, and kind of followed suit into, well, I don't really know. So these other people have laid this path. So I wanted to go down this similar path, going
Mm-hmm.
to a college that other cousins had already through, and went through similar programs. And as I was going through it, it was like, I was losing myself more and more, and, of course, had different support systems with friends and relationships, but I was losing myself in them, losing myself in my friends, losing them in my traditions with my family. And I was just questioning more and more, because I'd have this one side where I'd go hang out with the friends and, light up a doobie and hang out and get a little connected to source and to my heart. And then on the other side, I'd come back to my traditions and the habit cycles and those common pathways in my brain that I'm like, oh, if they show up this way, I show up the same way, and I was experiencing this disconnect, right? Of, well, who am I? Right.
Mm.
And so as I continued to evolve in that form, I started to realize I was disconnected to my physical self and my emotional self, right? I started to fill the space with substance, and so at one point I was well over 200 pounds. I was like 230. I remember last time, I think I was like 238, maybe 240. And I
Mm.
mean, I'm not really a big, tall person. So, I looked a lot like the girl in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the one that turned into a blueberry,
Mm.
it's pretty round. And so I experienced that level of depth of, oh, am I going to live this path and continue to feed myself this sense of love of external things, right? Giving myself food, giving myself substance, and filling that void because I was so lost. And again, I was doing all this while navigating college, navigating classes, education systems, taking tests and studying. And so it was really easy to get stuck in that vortex of that pace of life. And so um, at the same time, I started to really discover that this was not my path. I wasn't supposed to be an engineer. I'm not supposed to build these things or do these things. And really what kind of broke it for me was when I started studying physics, and I was like, fuck, if people already know all of this in life, right? If people already know so much of this fabric of reality, well, what can I know more of? Instead of catching up about these things, that everything is interconnected and divinely a part of one, then how can I actually show up in my truest form, really being a part of the fabric in my most harmonious, unified state? Because again, if I'm disconnected from what I'm doing in work, if I'm disconnected from my friends because the way they're showing up isn't truly what I feel sometimes, then how am I honoring myself? Which I wasn't, right? And so long story short, as I graduated college, I was again working with this startup, and in the startup, I was also consulting for an energy corporation, so it was interesting to see literally go up to the 90th floor, sit in my corner cubicle, gray walls. People were really friendly, but also we were just stuck into our little box. And then at the end of the day, I'd come down at about 3 p.m., after my corporate job that I'd get to at 6 a.m. And then I'd go down and drive over to my startup company that I was working with, right? And I'd sit in this, maybe 12 by 12 room with these other people at one table, all crunching our computers away, our keys away, and like we're sitting together and feeling unified in this sense of bond. And it was really interesting again to see literally the depths of one side versus the other. This, multi-million dollar company, if not billion, where I'm literally just trying to bring one more zero into their company. Whereas this one, we're just trying to survive and make an impact and make a change and find purpose and find value and provide value, right? And so it was really beautiful to see that depth. But along the way, of course, I still wasn't satisfied. I was finding myself lost in these jobs, placing myself and purpose in what am I here to do? What am I here to provide? Right. And so as I did that, I found myself lost in that. And I ended up leaving the corporate jobs, all my consulting gigs with a taxi company, a nuclear company, and then all these other electrical, energetic businesses that I found a lot of excitement in, but I found myself losing excitement for myself. Same with the startup. I found myself also losing myself and investing so much time and energy and putting my love into something external for myself, finding and seeking something.
Yeah.
So eventually I found a level of reconnection to what the truth is, and had a huge awakening. And this huge awakening was for me to realize that the love that I've been giving myself externally can be created from within. And so ended up leaving those things and traveled for a bit. Found myself, like you said, experiencing a lot of the country with support, but traveling a lot of the country to really experience what I'd never seen. I was born first generation in North Carolina, right? And so never really had an opportunity to travel not only with other people, but by myself. And so ended up finding myself in Hawaii after a long journey across the country, and found myself really just divinely connected back to my heart, to my soul, and to finding myself flowing with life in itself. And by doing so, I ended up meeting a really beautiful human. He is the reason why I kind of dove deeper into myself with these practices around stillness, silence. But it really reconnected me back to my breath. And why the breath was so important was I realized that the breath is the very first thing that you and I both had to learn. and hopefully everyone else on this call had to learn. And we realized that the breath being the first thing, it was the first thing that was written into my subconscious. And the whole programming is that then we can really discover how to rewrite these programmings in our subconscious through our breath. And, I started learning Wim Hof breathing method. I started learning about tumor breathing, dove into holotropic breathing, and I was just addicted to my breath, and what that really uncovered. And there's a lot of questions as to what the breath really is, right? And they talk
Mm-hmm.
about it in Yoga Sutra with pranayama and it being the life force, right? And even in Hebrew, they call it ruha, which is translated as spirit or energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in that sense, then what is the breath? And as I started to uncover my connection back to the breath, I started noticing that my breath was the guiding source and truth to how I want to show up and how I can actually remain present and safe in these containers and actually allow myself to be non-attached to a lot of these experiences. Because if I remain in my breath, then I can actually stay connected to my highest form, and not allow my past notions or future notions to influence where I want to go or where I want to be in this moment, but just be here. But yeah.
Wow, well, thank you for sharing all of that. That's a lot to share, and it's nice to hear, yeah, some of the further deeper back parts about your life in North Carolina that I haven't heard. And yeah, it makes me curious about your that moment where you really, it seemed like it happened in Hawaii where you really connected to your heart. Do you remember there being like a pivotal moment or like a kind of transitionary space, that liminal space in which a lot of the finding yourself outside in the companies and your workspace and the people around you led you to your heart? Was there something, I mean, was it the breath, or were you discovering the breath work after that moment?
I would say it was enchantment. It was like this state of wonder and curiosity, and it was like a flip of a switch, almost as if I went back to my childlike mindset, just viewing the world in just so much awe. It felt so just loving and nurturing. And of course, Hawaii is very nurturing in that sense, but just being there and being present and not having any desire but to be where I was, whether it was laying on the beach and camping out for a few days or riding a public bus and meeting locals. It was, how can I just truly show up for whoever and whatever that is right in front of me? Because if I accept that where I'm at right now, then everything that is right in front of my eyes is the gift. It is the purpose. So how can I also receive and unify myself with the purpose?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful outlook on life that you found, and I almost think like thank God that you had those experiences. Like they really drove you to find that that pureness and that purpose. I really love your definition of purpose. It pretty much aligns with mine as well. I've been calling the coaching that I do telos coaching, and telos is a word that means true aim, and it sort of means purpose. And it's kind of interesting, like explaining it. Like sometimes I don't like. It's like I got to explain this whole thing, and it's nice when you have a simple like life coaching. It's easy to explain. Um, but you got to live a lot of years, I think to really, maybe not, but we all have wisdom to share. But the telos resonates with me because I think that's what a lot of people are after. They're after their purpose, and you really conveyed it perfectly. It's not really a thing we do. It's not a career. It's not. I mean, it is closer, I think, to how we be in the world, but it really is this thing we're looking for that is the back of our head. It is us, and it is that deeper connection to us that I think a lot of us are looking for. And it's awesome that yeah, you found you, you found, and I think it's interesting when you find more of yourself and you realize that you know, at that point, it's not like anything necessarily happens, right? Like, you don't, I mean, of course, you're going to have an insight of like, wow, here I am. And maybe this is really what I want. And this is really more of me than I thought I was. And I think there's a place that opens up in you in terms of being present with the world, that is like a freshness and a newness, and purpose is in some ways ongoing. It's like we're always finding our purpose. It's kind of a continual process, and we also arrive there, continually, I suppose, as much as we want. Is there anything you might want to add to that?
Mm. I think recognizing that continuous journey, that it is never ending, that
Mm-hmm.
we have a true connection to this infinite realm of possibilities, that even though that we've maybe told that life can seem very linear, that is not the truth. The truth is that our life is more of a multi-dimensional experience of light. As we recognize this opportunity to connect to these multi levels and layers of light, we can actually influence not only our experience but others as well. In our lifeline with our ancestors, to our lifeline in the future. But it's interesting too, because it's also a interconnected experience where if I'm doing it, then it's also happening in the forefront and everything in between. Because what you can notice is, yes, I physically am per se not that old, and I recognize that I have so much more experience to have, but I've noticed that by doing what I've done, and I'm sure similar to you, it's unleashed and opened up a direct connection to our own sense of wisdom from maybe past information that has been given or gifted to us by being who we are, by connecting in a way that has allowed us to be a vessel for receiving a level of intuition or insight or just knowledge that has been far beyond our physical self, but is now us as a receiver for the information. And how can we now remind people of it? Because, I'm not saying anything new, and most of us aren't, but it's recognizing how can we remind people of these simple truths, and how can we come back here to this moment and come back to our hearts and actually live in this space, and not allow the influences, right, of those profit making machines, and those social media machines, like these things taking us out of the here and the now and the actual infinite possibilities, right?
Yeah, I really love that. That's perfectly said. Because we all have our own inner wisdom, and I think, like a lot of the coaching work you're doing with people is, you offer something, but really, I find that the real coach is the inner coach, and the real insights we're looking for is, they're within. And it's wild to see what actually unravels when you spend more time in that space. I mean, even recently, I was, I used to meditate a bit more a few years ago, and I would spend. There was a point where I did have my own feeling of like maybe not wanting to be as much in the 3D, and I had this amazing experience in India, and like I had this yoga practice, and it just, there's a part of like, the industrialized culture that didn't make so much sense to me. And then I realized the imbalance there, and I sort of entered back into the 3D space. Like, all right, well, maybe there's more to creating, in this world, and shifting, and creating something new that doesn't necessarily have to fit into that, but can be my own thing. And so I spent a lot of time in that creative entrepreneurial space, and I've more recently come back around to spending more silent time with myself, and seeing that space as somewhat of an active space. And it's been wild to see how much we, like you said, it's not really linear. And the things that I feel like I've been able to tap into are these like non-linear pieces and threads to my being that are at this soul level. They're like beyond my physical form. And they're, I would go so far as to say they're in past lives. They're at another point in time. Maybe that it's like, how do I have these certain resonances that feel beyond this life? And I just find it to be, I mean, either way. I mean, I think our lives, our current incarnations hold the seeds for everything we need in this life. But it's magical what happens when you actually just allow and you connect in a little deeper. Um, there's actually a lecture that I was privileged to be a part of recently about an Alaskan shaman. I think he lived in like I might not get this right, but I think it was uh, the Bering Strait. I think that one is around Alaska, but he shared some of his wisdom, and he sat with a council of elders in Kauai, and he's talking about um, the importance of our time, and how there has been secrets, there has been these occult esoteric secrets in these wisdom traditions, and they haven't always been exposed. And he said that the time is now over, and the time now is for sharing all of it. And he's like, that's why I'm sharing all of it right now. And he was sharing all this wisdom, and one of the central components he mentioned, I think, is a really beautiful parallel to the story you shared, was that moment in Hawaii where you found this enchantment of your own innocence, and this moment of connecting to the childlike quality of wonder and awe. And one of the things that the elders were telling him was that the person that we actually need to look to for wisdom right now, and for the messages that we need, is the 2-year old. And I just thought that was so interesting. It's like, and he said, like, well, look at that 2-year old. Like, look at them. They're complete geniuses. I mean, they know how to be in this world, and they're, they go from this like extreme happiness and curiosity and interest and awe and like playfulness, and then they bounce right back into this like moment of like, being destroyed over something, and crying and getting really angry. And um, I just felt like, I was interpreting that as like this flow of emotions. Like we could really use this openness to allow whatever we're feeling to really just flow and to be felt, and allow that to guide us a little bit more. Not that I feel like, you know, emotions are the single sole guiding post of your life, right? But if they're not at all, how much are we missing out on? And I think awakenings have a lot to do with returning to that original innocence. Realizing the self, the person we are beyond what we've been told. So I really appreciate you sharing your story, and just kind of connecting the dot there of how important that is.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for reflecting and sharing that insight on it. I think it's a really simple thing, but again, it comes back to noticing how can we commit ourselves to doing that work, and
Mm-hmm.
staying not attached, and even in, I'm sure your coaching practice, or even in mine, it's realize that the greatest coach is the inner coach. And so even when we were working with other people, it's like noticing how can we just create that container, right?
Yep.
And that space for people to reconnect back to that feeling space, and
Mm-hmm.
allow the information to move through them, and also the emotion to move through them. Because as we recognize, like, how I like to describe the space is almost like the forceps in heart surgery, right?
Mm.
As we recognize the space being created, we are the forceps per se as the coach, right? And what's happening is the person that's being received is they're letting a higher intuition or information or guide to come in and actually do the healing. Whereas we're just the one that's holding the space, or that part of the heart open to receive it.
Yeah. Yeah, and allowing their and the intelligence of their system to really be that guidepost.
Right, exactly. We do no healing. We just
Mm-hmm.
witness, and we give them the attention that they also deserve and are worthy of, to allow them to answer and ask themselves the questions that they already have the solutions to. But as we uncover, it's like there's ways to allow it to move a lot more freely, right? Whether it's movement, breath works, meditations,
Mm-hmm.
allowing ourselves to disconnect from that physical sense of self, or those stories or attachments, that allow the non-attachments to come in, and that childlike mindset can move through, and the enchantment, the wonder, and the true essence of our purpose can start to show up, so we can really experience that, you know, sustainable you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Well, in college, I was studying sustainability and Earth sustainability, and we were focusing on all these global environmental issues, and from food and agriculture to water and waste and energy and all of that. And at the end of it, I was just like, it kept boiling down to like attitude and mindset, and because it's like, well, okay, well, what is like enough with like the you know the view of gloom, like what is the solution? And it just felt like it was always boiling down to attitude and personal mindset and psychology. And it really kind of pushed me into the study of like the human psyche and human behavior. And of course, like it's nice to have a context of physics and quantum physics placed into all that as well, because it's important to see like natural laws at play as well. um, but I really love how what you're saying, that really is their sustainability to me at this point. The way I'm seeing things is, it's the same correlation that is in coaching. Like if I want to be able to be a coach that holds that heart open for another person, and I act as the forceps to their heart open experience, so that they can allow them, there can be allowance of their intelligence to come in, then what enables me to do that? Well, doing my own work and looking within. And it's the same thing, same parallel to the earth. Like whatever views we see around what's going on in the world right now, I find that we just got to look within first.
Mhm.
Like it really needs to happen that way, because it is a reflection. I mean, there's a whole field, eco psychology, that talks about the self as synonymous with world. And there's so much scientific evidence of that being true. And yeah, it's just a good reminder. So you know being in the times we're in, sometimes it's like, oh man, look at what's going on. And I feel like things are getting a little bit more polarized and wild and seemingly chaotic. And how much are we looking within?
Agreed. I find it interesting because, our world is that reflection, but we are continuously asking, what does the world need? And we answer it by filling it with more stuff. And we want to create this thing, and we want to create this thing, right? And yes, certain products or certain things are bettering the world, right? That are making it more sustainable. But like you're discovering and like you're mentioning, it's not these external things that we need, right? The world doesn't need more solar panels, right? The world doesn't need more electric cars. It's amazing and it's great and it helps the environment so much. But what the world needs is for people to come alive. So instead of asking, what does the world need? It's asking, what do you need? What do I need?
Totally.
And by answering that myself, then I know myself. And by doing that, I will show up bettering the world.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, it's been real, as it always is. And yeah, I feel like, before we wrap up, it might be worthwhile tying in the work that you do with habitual roots into this, because one of the things I think you've highlighted here is, the challenge is oftentimes, how do we develop that practice? And so I wonder if there's anything you want to mention before we close things out around habits and what you're doing at Habitual Roots.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to share and asking.
Yeah, you bet.
Habitual Roots, it's essentially a nonprofit. We aim to put the you back in human, is what we like to say. But how we do that is really your own experience. So we offer a plethora of ways to do so. Ways such as community events throughout the cities of Denver, Colorado, North Carolina, and Charlotte, and as well as now Santa Cruz, California. These are all just community events, but we also have a deeper practice. So, if people want to connect more personally to themselves, we offer personalized private meditations and as well as ways to reconnect back into that feeling state, really to feel to heal and allowing the information to move freely through you. So we just offer personal wellness as well and just different trainings. But we're here for you, and what we do is we show up, and if you show up, we provide things to you as well, as accessible and freely as possible. So
Yeah, it's been cool being part of what you guys have created. And yeah, I mean, I think we can all do it alone if we want, but man, it makes it a lot more fun and easy with other people around us.
100%.
Yeah, and you guys have developed a really cool methodology, the roots methodology around seeing the fundamentals, which really is like the high wisdom, I think, around how to handle your breath, your mind, your body, and your heart, and it's pretty amazing. So
Yeah.
check it out, habitualroots.com. Thank you, Kevin. It's always a pleasure. I look forward to more conversations in the future.
Yeah, same. Thank you,
All right,
Kinan.
brother. Cheers.
Mhm.